Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kyoteru Tsutsui. I'm the director of Stanford University's Shorenstein Asia Pacific Research Center, APAC. And it is my great honor and pleasure to open our Taiwan Program's 2026 conference. Visions of Taiwan's future, navigating paths through democracy, technology, and culture. Thank you for joining us today. Visions of Taiwan's future. From far more than an academic title, the theme of our conference reflects a resounding recognition that Taiwan stands at the crossroads of some of the most consequential transformations of our century, arguably the Asian century. From my vantage point, leading a research center dedicated to understanding the complexities of the Asia Pacific, it is evident that sustained, in-depth engagement with Taiwan is essential to any serious account of the region's trajectory and the forces shaping its future on the world stage. Taiwan is a critical nexus, a place where the currents of democracy under pressure, rapid technological advancement amid geopolitical competition, and highly creative cultural expression converge with unique intensity. And these three areas are all represented in today's panels. And they're not exclusively Taiwanese issues, but rather cross-regional and global ones. And Taiwan offers a rich lens through which we can bring interdisciplinary, evidence-based research to bear on the great challenges facing nations in the Asia-Pacific and elsewhere. And we must probe these issues now. The world is looking to Taiwan not only for its achievements as a modernization success story and pivotal role in tech innovation and semiconductor supply chains, but also for lessons in resilience, the nurturing of a vibrant civil society, growing cultural influence, and pathways to address the challenges now confronting its economy and society. Challenges that echo the dilemmas of other post-industrial economies. To study Taiwan today is to study the world at the leading edge of change. And that is why we founded the Taiwan program as part of APAC. Its launch marked a significant milestone in Stanford's engagement with Taiwan and its commitment to Taiwan studies. Since the program's inaugural conference in May 2024, we have welcomed our first postdoctoral fellow, launched several research projects, established a regular colloquium series, convened our first conference in Taipei, and directed intensive efforts to expand our scholarly community. We envision a program that flourishes as a world-class research and education hub, one that spurs forward-looking, interdisciplinary scholarship on contemporary Taiwan and cultivates cross-sector cooperation with and in Taiwan. As we look to build on the strong foundation laid over the past 2 years, I am delighted to say that the program is entering an exciting new phase. We are thrilled to announce today that we have appointed Professor Pei-Che Lan as the Wang and Chen Senior Fellow in Taiwan Studies and the incoming faculty director of the Taiwan program. This appointment is the outcome of an extensive international search for a senior faculty member who build on the momentum already in place and ensure the program's continued success for years to come. I will briefly introduce Pei-Che, but rest assured she is the perfect candidate. If we asked AI to create a profile of a perfect person for this position, AI would produce her. Pei-Che is a distinguished professor of sociology at National Taiwan University, where she served as the founding director of the Global Asia Research Center, 2017 to 2023. A leading scholar in her field, she explores the complexity of intersecting social inequalities in everyday life, shaped by macro power dynamics such as globalization and international migration. She's the author of a couple of major books and a number of articles in academic journals. Her books include Global Cinderellas, Migrant Domestics, and Newly Rich Employers in Taiwan. from Duke University Press, and Raising Global Families, Parenting, Immigration, and Class in Taiwan and the US from Stanford University Press. Hailed as analytically innovative and meticulous, her transnational cross-class research makes complex social issues accessible and resonant. And she has firmly established her work has firmly established her as a sought-after expert by national agencies and global organizations alike. She has a role on the advisory board for UN Women, for instance. And we are deeply grateful to our visionary donors and supporters who have made the Taiwan program and Peicha's appointment possible through their passion, commitment, and generosity. We look forward to officially welcome Peicha to Stanford and APAC in the fall and eagerly anticipate the new avenues of research, training, and intellectual exchange she will pioneer at the university. And this is a fitting moment to acknowledge and introduce my colleague, Professor Gi-wook Shim. Gi-wook is the founding director of the Korea program at APAC and also our former APAC director. He played a pivotal role in developing and launching the Taiwan program and has graciously continued to offer his guidance this academic year, including for today's convening, even while he's on a well-deserved sabbatical. And no one is better suited to share insight into the program's journey and offer more context for and a closer look at the conversation topics we have in store today. So please enjoy the discussions, and thank you again for joining us. And now please welcome Gi-wook Shim.
Okay, thank you, Gio, for a nice introduction. And thank you all for joining us for the second Taiwan conference here at Stanford. As Gio mentioned, I'm on sabbatical this year. I'm here to attend this important occasion. 2 years ago, with the support of many of you here today, we launched a Stanford Taiwan program. Establishing a program named Taiwan is meaningful, to say the least. And it's not something we take for granted. From the very beginning, our goal has been to build a lasting intellectual and institutional platform, one that cultivates Taiwan-focused scholarship and strengthen connections among Taiwan, the United States, and broader global communities. As we mark the end of our second year, we'd like to briefly reflect on what we have accomplished and where we hope to go next. Over the past 2 years, we have launched a colloquium series featuring different themes related to Taiwan. We have invited scholars and practitioners to share their cutting-edge research and insights on Taiwan's politics, society, economy, legal institutions, and global law. We also worked to build communities both on and off campus. Through seminars, conferences, and student engagement, the Taiwan program has become a space for dialogue across discipline, generations, and institutions. Over the past 2 years, we have welcomed students, local Taiwanese American communities, Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, and scholars who deeply care about Taiwan's geopolitical position and future. Looking ahead, we hope to further expand our support for Taiwan-focused scholars, including visiting scholars, postdoctoral fellows, PhD students, and faculty. We also hope to encourage more Taiwan-related teaching and research here at Stanford. At the same time, we are working to position our Taiwan program as part of a broader intellectual and organization network connecting Taiwan studies programs and centers across the United States and beyond. With our inaugural postdoctoral fellow, Liu Fan, here. We are working to study Taiwan program from a comparative perspective through the Stanford Next Asia Policy Lab, with the hope that such comparison can generate policy insights and help advance the future of Taiwan study more broadly. And as Guy already mentioned, I'm particularly delighted and relieved that Professor Pei-Chai Lan will join us in the fall. And actually, I met her first time some years ago when she was directing Global Asia Center at NTU. So she invited me to give 5 lectures over one week. And then I came to know her more closely. And then I cannot think of any better person to take this position as a senior fellow and also leading our Taiwan program. So I've been taking off my hats one by one. Last year, Kia took over one of my hats, and she will be taking other hat of mine in the fall. So I'm very confident that she will elevate our Taiwan program to the next level. So as our team enters a period of transition, we are grateful for the support, collaboration, and friendship that have sustained the program over the past 2 years. We really welcome you to continue joining us in building this community. I'd like to express my sincere appreciation of the work that Karen, I was now acting director for Taiwan program this year during my leave, and Rio Fan, our postdoc, and then Shebi, our staff, have done to organize today's conference. So thank you again for being here today, and we look forward to the conversations ahead. Thank you.
As the longtime co-director of our Taiwan program at the Hoover Institution, I want to say how thrilled I am now to have a parallel and closely cooperating and more student-facing program at FSI. Pei-Chai, we are so thrilled to have you here. I just can't tell you, but you know. And I will just briefly echo before I introduce the panel how grateful I am personally to my 3 FSI colleagues, Gi-wook Shin, Kyo Tsutsui, and Karen Eggleston for carrying us to this point and for their vision and their extremely hard work, beginning, of course, with Gi-wook in raising the funds for this program and bringing it to fruition. Karas can tell you from his own teaching, there's a lot of student demand and interest on this campus for engagement with Taiwan. So we're pushing on an open door. So I think you know the structure of the panel, of the conference today. In case you don't, it's democracy, technology, and then culture. So this is our democracy session. And it's wonderful to be able to introduce our 3 panelists, all of whom I've known either for a little time or actually quite a long time. And I'll begin with Kai-Ping Wong, who I've known for a pretty long time, in part because of our collaboration from the very beginning, I think more than 20 years ago now, in the really formative work of the Asian Barometer based at National Taiwan University, where Kai-Ping is an associate professor of political science. She's written very widely about attitudes and values and how they change toward democracy in Taiwan and East Asia, and about party systems, formal institutions, and democratic change more broadly in East and Southeast Asia. And her work has appeared in the Journal of Democracy, Democratization, Social Indicators Research, and several edited volumes. So Kai-Ping will speak first. She'll be followed by Kai-Shun Wang, we had an opportunity to hear from yesterday at Hoover on a somewhat different subject. He is the director of the Democratic Governance Program at Taiwan's Research Institute for Democracy, Society, and Emerging Technology. That is DSET, although I think I heard yesterday that you'll have a new affiliation beginning in the fall. Is that correct? Yeah. And so he will be moving to one of the premier academic centers in Taiwan, the Academia Sinica. He holds a PhD in anthropology from the University of Oxford and is trained both in law and social science. His research areas include the geopolitics of AI, which in a way we heard about yesterday, digital governments, and foreign information manipulation and interference. His work focuses on how emerging technologies impact democratic practices and institutions, particularly regarding China's digital influence and AI diffusion strategies, which again we heard about yesterday. And I think some of his remarks will provide maybe a bridge between this session and the next one. Finally, my longtime collaborator in Taiwan studies here at Stanford and one of my partners in the Hoover Institution program on Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific region, Karis Templeman, who is manager of that program at Hoover and a research fellow at Hoover. Karis is a political scientist with research interests in Taiwan politics, democratization, elections, election management, party system development, democratic party systems. He's written about this comparatively in terms of Pacific Asia, and of course very extensively with regard to Taiwan. I think it's fair to say that there are not many Americans in academia. There may be a few Americans like Brent on the practitioner and diplomatic side who know more about Taiwan and Taiwan democracy than Karis does. So I don't know what your instructions are about whether you've been guided as to how long you should speak, but I'll trust that you have some sense of that. Maybe, did you get instructions?
20 minutes for the presentation.
Okay, great. So Kai-Ping, how about if we start with you?
Okay, thank you. Today, because actually Asian Promise Survey, let me introduce this program a little bit. It was founded by Professor Yunhan Zhu at National Taiwan University around 2000. And since then, Larry has been our long-term advisor, even now. So Larry has been giving us very strong support. So we get a chance to expand the survey from Northeast Asia to Southeast Asia into South Asia. So right now we survey about like 18 countries across the region. So today you're going to see how those the status of those countries. The status of these democratic countries across the region. Okay, so today I'm going to focus on how does the democratic resilience of Taiwanese citizens compare to other countries in the region, and also I focus on partisan identities because maybe you know that polarization is a serious problem in Taiwan right now. And so there is serious gridlock between the executive and legislative branches right now. So we are going to focus on whether this kind of conflict, like partisan conflict, really affect people's support for democracy in Taiwan. Okay, so because we are going to use several items to measure people's support for democracy, and now because democratic resilience is buzzword in political science, so I will also use resilience to describe how people's strong support for this political regime. Okay, so for some of you, you may not know what IRT is. So this is very brief explanation about this measurement technology. Okay, so with IRT, we actually collect a lot of different items, asking people about their attitude toward authoritarian alternatives and how much they support democracy. Okay, so we treat support for democracy or democratic resilience as a latent trait variable. And when you put all these items together, each item comes with two parameters. The first one, we call it difficulty parameter. The other one is discrimination. But today we're going to focus on discrimination. That is the slope. And it actually shows like, how cleanly does this item separate true Democrats from non-Democrats, which means like if people agree with one item, compared with those who disagree with the item, so the chance for the one who agrees, the chance for that person to become a Democrat is much higher than those who disagree with the item. Okay, so this is technology also help us to understand the performance of each item we use to measure democratic support. Okay, so in this case, we use about like 6 items, and according to the difficulty parameter and the discrimination parameter they have, we can just separate the performance of the items into this 2x2 table. And most of the items we use falls in these baseline values. So most of them have a high slope, but low threshold, which means that a majority of the respondents in Taiwan or in most countries actually agree with the item. Okay, so which means that it's not difficult to answer, but once people agree with the item, it's definitely can separate them from non-Democrats. Okay, so the items we use to measure democratic resilience, depending on 6 items. These 6 items are actually 6 questions we ask repeatedly from wave 1 to wave 6. Okay, so it's like whether you tend to reject strongman rule, or Esper rule, and one-party system and military rule. And we also have these the question we ask respondents whether they think that democracy is always preferable to other kinds of regime, or whether it doesn't matter to you, or whether sometimes an authoritarian regime can be acceptable. And we also have another question we take from World Value Survey, which we call it Churchillian democratic support. It's the question that, compared to other regimes in the world, democracy may have its problem, but it's still the best form of the government. Okay, so through using IRT, and we will see that the discrimination score, rejection of strongman rule, has the largest discrimination parameter, which means that it's a very good item to separate Democrats with non-Democrats. But then preference for democracy and democracy is the best form of government. These 2 items are poor performers within these 6 items. Okay, and the next one is reject Esper rule. But because each country has their own authoritarian past. For example, in Taiwan, because Taiwan was under the KMT rule, which is a one-party regime, for a long time. So we people in Taiwan still have this nostalgia for one-party regime. So compared to like strongman rule or Esper rule and military rule, actually a fewer Taiwanese, a little more Taiwanese actually still support one-party regime. Okay, so after we calculate this latent trait variable. So then we can plot the trend across countries because we have 6 waves. So you can see the different dots there for each country. And we also can rank all the countries in the region. And so you can see that Taiwan, of course, we are not, number 1 country in the list, I mean, across the region, but we are in the top tier. Oh, that's for sure. And just you wonder that, because you see like Singapore and Hong Kong, the score are actually a little bit, ahead of Taiwan. I will explain why. I mean, just in case you wonder why that's the case. And our rank is almost similar to South Korea. And because South Korea recent political situation there is a little bit similar to Taiwan. And so the experiences of democratization is also similar between Taiwan and South Korea. Okay, so across all these items, you will see that, almost in Northeast Asia, including Australia and also Singapore, I think that, with a typical latent trait variable, over 90% of their respondents actually reject authoritarian alternatives. Okay, so and why Taiwan's rank is a little bit lower than Singapore? That's because in Singapore, because in Taiwan, only half of the respondents say that democracy is always preferable to authoritarian regimes, even though more than 95% of respondents will reject any other authoritarian alternatives. Okay, so this is a puzzle in my mind, but it's not something difficult to understand. Okay, because you will see that North Korea, it's similar story that party politics is messy to most of these countries. Okay, you can also look at Mongolia. Mongolia only like less than half of the respondents say that democracy is always preferable to other regimes. So party politics, this messy party politics, actually make a lot of respondents in Korea, in Taiwan, feel that they don't like authoritarian regimes, but they are not really fully committed in democracy because democracy in practice really have a lot of problems. For people who don't really understand checks and balances, why they compete so hard, what they say is just meaningless confrontation between or across different parties. Okay, so but then if we go to South Asia and even South Asia, you will see that fewer people really get to reject authoritarian alternatives. And so what makes these democratic countries strong is that at least first, their citizens must have the gut to reject other authoritarian alternatives. Okay, but to make them fully commit to democracy, I think it depends on politicians, how they can really produce concrete outcomes. Okay, so, but then let's back and focus on Taiwan. So if we really track the change of this resilience, then the resilience score is increasing across waves. So because our first wave, we did the survey in 2001, and the last one is wave 6, we did it in 2022. So you will see that it's actually increasing, especially since wave 5. We did wave 5 around 2016, which is actually the DPP's second rule. Okay, so and you will see that support for democracy is really increasing in that period. But at the same time, polarization is also increasing as well. Okay, so in our ABS, we don't measure effective polarization. So I actually borrow this from another survey project called TEDS in Taiwan. Okay, so they measure effective polarization using likability and people's whether you like this party to measure, and they just see the differences between this in-group favoritism and out-group dislikability. And you will see that actually for the DPP partisans, they become increasingly like their own parties, and then at the same time, they increasingly dislike other parties, which is the KMT. And it's the same for the KMT partisans. But because and this line we call it effective polarization is increasing. It's mostly due to the increasing favorability within the DPP partisans, which means that for DPP partisans, they like the party even more, in the recent years. Okay, so even with this very clearly effective polarization, Taiwan's democracy or people's support democracy is still increasing. Okay, so and then we'll see that even though that's the fact, but we still have some blind spot that we have to deal with. And here is. So we'll see that, one-party regime and strongman rule, still a few of Taiwanese still cannot resist this lure of authoritarian regime, especially for strongman rule and one-party rule. Okay, so even though the majority of Taiwanese still have this very strong rejection of authoritarianism, but some of them still do not really reject it. Okay, so then this partisan paradox I would like to talk about. That is because in political science we know that winner-loser gap, which means that losers, when they lose elections, they tend to question the legitimacy of democracy. But how the parties form or the values that back up the party is also a key. So in this examination, I just categorize parties into reformist parties, which means that they found the party because they want to challenge the status quo, and they also demand some reforms in their own regimes. And we also have established parties. So in Taiwan context, reformist party here, of course, refers to DPP, and then established party refers to the KMT. So you'll see that when the DPP is in opposition, their partisans, their support for democracy actually increasing. But for the KMT, when they become the losers, when they are in opposition, then the support for democracy declines. So this is not surprising, given the DNAs or the philosophies of these two parties. But it seems that the DPP supporters are still, they should be the stronghold of Taiwanese democracy in that sense. But there is also weakness too. That is, when their parties are in power, they are more complacent with the regime. So they tend not to criticize their parties, when they are ruling the country. And it's the same across DPP partisans and KMT partisans. Okay, so you will see that, especially when DPP, this is DPP Rule 1, which means that in 2001, the Chen Shui-bian's administration, and at the time, actually, DPP held the executive branch, but they were the minority in the legislative branch. Okay, so in that case, actually, the DPP partisans, when they are satisfied with how the government performed, then their support for democracy actually declined. Okay, so and the DPP Rule 2, it's a little bit better, but still it's negative. The coefficient is still negative, which means that they support, when they are satisfied with the government, they tend not to support democracy that much. So it's a little bit strange, but it just means that they tend not to be so critical about their own government. Okay, so and this is DPP Rule 2, and because DPP has been ruled the country, this should be the 12th year, but since 2024. The party actually had minority in the legislative yuan. And so we are now conducting our Web 7 survey right now. We are collecting data. And so I'm keen to see that whether the DPP partisans, will they behave like, like they were in DPP Rule 1, or maybe they can really, break up this winner's curse, and then really look at how the government performs and give them fair criticisms. Okay, so and then the KMT. So before and after. So you will see that if we only look at this democratic resilience, that the latent score. So when this is DPP Rule 1 and DPP Rule 2, and in DPP Rule 2, because they have been in opposition for such a long time. So KMT partisans' support for democracy actually declined. So compared to DPP Rule 1, they actually, their support is almost equivalent to the DPP partisans. So you don't see any differences. But then in DPP Rule 2, because they have been opposition for like more than 10 years, so now, this is a very significant slump in DPP Rule 2. This is KMT partisans, which means that, some of them really reject democracy and really embrace one-party rule. So it brought, being opposition for such a long time, it brought up this very nostalgia for authoritarian regime, especially when they were in power. Okay, so preference for democracy also declined in period 2. So across all, we see some great rails, urbanization, political interest, actually increase people's support for democracy, but education level and economic polarization actually make people not to support democracy that much, especially for education. Educated people in Taiwan, after you control for urbanization, their tendency to support democracy actually is lower than than those people without tertiary education. I don't know why, but I'm going to dip into to examine that. What's the reason behind it? Okay, so Taiwan's democratic future, as far I can see, is that it's still very strong, but it also comes with what position you have in the government, whether you are in opposition, and even though you are the governing party, it also depends on whether your party has majority in the legislative branch or not. So I think the true test for Taiwan's democracy is when the DPP is in power and when the party loses majority in the legislative yuan, how the parties and the government handle the situation will determine whether Taiwan's democracy can really transcend and go into the next step of consolidation. Okay, thank you. That's my presentation.
That was great. That was so interesting. Thank you so much. Kai-shun, do you want to give us your presentation now?
Good morning, and thank you to the organizer for putting this panel together. And I think there are not many rooms where Taiwan get to do the case study rather than just a footnote. So I'm super grateful for this opportunity. So my name is Kai-shun Huang, and I'm the director for the demographic governance at DCES in Taipei. And I'm going to spend the next 20 or so minutes on three things. First, what Taiwan's disinformation defense actually does. Second, where it starts working. And finally, what I think democracy is watching Taiwan can take from that. And my argument in one line is this. The defense has done brilliant work on content, but I think the next step should be something more structural, not just the content. So here's the overview of my presentation today, 4 parts. So part 1, the threat landscape, why Taiwan is the stress test. Part 2, the 3-tier defense Taiwan has built-in response. And part 3, which I think is the most challenging part, where that defense meets its limits, and my suggestion that follows from those limits. And part 4, the final part, what I mean during the presentation when I said the defense runs on contract and what that matters for what comes next. So I will start with the claim that Taiwan is the stress test, not a stress test, the stress test. So according to VDAM, the Digital Society Project, Taiwan has ranked first in the world for exposure to foreign disinformation for 11 years running. That's 2013 to 2024, uninterrupted. So you don't really get to the top of that list by having one bad election. You get there by being the place where the most capable information operator in the world run its operation continuously against democracy in Mandarin and at a scale. Now, let me just say a little bit more about what that continuity actually means. In most democracies, information pressure arrives in episodes, an election cycle, a referendum. It means the defense systems has a run-up, a peak, and a recovery. But in Taiwan, I think there's literally no recovery phase. There's no off-season. The operation is sustained. It is resourced and adaptive. When one vector closes, another opens. So that's what 11 years at the top of that ranking actually looks like, which means I think this is the most useful part for you. Whatever defense works in Taiwan has been pressure tested against the worst case. If it works here, it has the chance elsewhere. If it doesn't work here, it probably doesn't not work anywhere. So part 2, what has Taiwan built? The response, I think, over roughly 15 years is a 3-tier civil society ecosystem. And the most useful way, I think, to see it is as a pipeline across time. Before an event, during an event, and after an event. Before prevention, which refers to media literacy, it has been integrated into the K-12 curriculum since 2019, which means an entire cohort of Taiwanese students has now been through structured training. How to read a claim, how to check a source, how to notice when they are being worked on. And there are also community workshops that reach older adults in temples, in civic centers, and neighborhood associations. And that is the demographic most exposed to forwarded content. And I think the goal of the media literacy is not really to make every citizen a fact checker. The goal is to make the population less fragile to a single viral claim. Number 2, during real-time responses, which refers to the fact-checking tier. So you have IFC certified professional fact-checkers operating to international standards, and the volunteer-driven platforms where users forward insuspicious items from dominant messaging app. And I think that hybrid is something I think Taiwan has generally pioneered, because having professional rigor plus volunteer scale, it lets the system operate at high quality and high volume. And in my experience, those two in other countries in general trade off against each other. Number 3, after post-event analysis. Here we have anti-manipulation research NGOs that trace the infrastructure behind operation, who run it, through which channels, under which narrative frames, and I think crucially, with which local amplifiers. This is the tier that turns individual incident into intelligence, into patterns, not just anecdotes. So 3 tiers: prevention, response, analysis. Each tier, I think, is doing the real work. So internationally, this is the kind of ecosystem people come to Taiwan to study. And I just wanted to be clear here. So today I'm not here to dismiss it. I think this is a genuine achievement. It has absorbed enormous pressure. This is the reason Taiwanese democracy has held through an environment that on paper looks like it should have broken years ago. Now, I just want to argue the ecosystem works extremely well against the discrete disinformation claims. But it was not really designed for what happens when the system itself is the problem. So that's the part 3. That's what part 3 is all about. Yeah. Now, the harder part. The reason I said earlier that disinformation in the usual sense is not the problem is this. Think about what actually destabilizes an information environment. In my experience watching Taiwan, it is not just one piece of content, not just an isolated false claim. It is a moment where the environment really changes, where trust in public institutions moves, where public mobilization takes on a shape nobody predicted. And what produced this moment, I think, is the convergence of 3 things. Number 1, unregulated foreign platforms, the platforms where most of our information flows and over which we have no domestic jurisdiction. We don't set their amplification rules. We don't audit their recommendation systems. We don't sit inside their advertising and the distribution pipelines. The content is domestic, but the infrastructure is basically foreign. Number 2, a state actor with both the motive and operational capability to run sustained campaigns. The operator you would expect, the capability is not speculative. It is widely documented. It is continuous, and it adapts. This is the actor that across the 11 years I just mentioned earlier has been running operations against Taiwan's information environment without a break. So that's number 2. Now, number 3, pre-existing local networks, political networks, religious networks, temple networks, content creator or influencer networks. Sorry. These are the kind of network that constitute the 3rd element I'm referred to. And all of them can be seeded with material from outside. And all of them carry that material into trusted social context, where it's no longer read as foreign. The last step is what makes the whole thing work. An imported narrative delivered through a trusted local mouth is not imported anymore. It becomes local. So that's the 3 things that converge. So foreign platforms, state operator, and local amplifiers. When those 3 things light up, you don't just have disinformation. You basically have a system that produces instability on demand. So here's the point. The 3 defense tiers I just mentioned, prevention, response, and analysis, none of them is built to disrupt that convergence in a systematic manner. They are built to work on the content once it is already flowing. They can slow it, they can annotate it, they can explain it after the fact, but they cannot really break the system that produced it. So, but frankly, I just want to say a little bit more carefully, one thing carefully. When online narrative escalates into offline mobilization in Taiwan, the defense system is not really failing. Civil protest or mobilization is legitimate democratic expression. The analytical point here is rather structural. The three-tier model works against certain claims, but it encounters a boundary when what it faces is a campaign operating at system level. So that's a design boundary, not really a failure. So I think what Taiwan needs now is really to reframing the problem. So for about a decade, the question driving this field has been, how do we eliminate disinformation? How do we debunk faster? How do we literacy train earlier? How do we take more of it down? But I think every major initiative, public civic platform, has been variation on that question. I think that question is the wrong question. Information manipulation, I think, is a feature of human societies. It's much older than platforms. It's older than the internet. It's potentially older than democracy. You can't really cure it. A decade of trying to cure it has produced a lot of good work on symptoms. But the body of that problem is still there. The operator has gotten more sophisticated, not less. So I think the question we should be asking, how do we make the system of instability structurally harder to assemble? That is a different project of governance. Just one quick aside, I just noticed at the recent turn to cognitive warfare in the regional discourse. But I think in my view, it falls into the very same trap. It renames the problem, but it does not really relocate it. The problem is still being treated as a question of what enters people's mind, rather than how the system that tackles them is assembled. So instead, I think policymakers should pay more attention to the conditions under which the convergence I just described can happen. The problem is architecture. The architecture that's left foreign platforms, that resourceful state operator and the local enterprise line up into something that produces instability. You don't ask how to make every claim untrue. You ask how to make the assembly harder, slower, more expensive, and less reliable. And that direction from the old question to the new question, I think is the very center of this presentation, and everything from here follows from it. So in more practical terms, what does that direction look like? It looks like this. To be more, just don't fight the content, break the system. To be more specific, that is 3 proposals, and each of them trace a familiar move for a structural one. And this is the democratic path, not an authoritarian one. First, from tracing content to disrupting the convergence. Asking less how to debunk this claim faster, start asking how to raise the cost of assembly. The claim, the amplification, the local carrier. Line them up into one operation. That is why you raise the cost of it. That's the transparency requirement on platform algorithms. That is visibility into cross-border advertisement networks. That is the slow patchwork work of making the infrastructure legible. So that's the first proposal. Second, from speech suppression to platform accountability through regulation. So I want to be slightly more precise here. The proposal is not really to let the state decide what is true. The proposal is to compel platforms through regulations to disclose what they are doing, who is advertising to whom, what is being amplified, what is being throttled. Accountability at the system level, not censorship at the content level. So that's the second proposal. The third one, from narrative control to infrastructure resilience. You can't really mandate a single dominant narrative in a democracy without breaking the democracy. So that's the dilemma. What you can do is harden the infrastructure, the channels, the authentication, the routing, make them resistant to the kind of orchestration that manufacture false consensus. So that's the third proposal. So before I move on, one clarification. I think the work civil society does on content remain necessary. The fact-checking, the literacy, the research, all of it stays. It is just not sufficient. That's my argument. The sufficient conditions are more structural. And structural work, in my view, is not the work civil society alone can do, which is the last part. So here's why I think structural is the next step. Taiwan's defense is rather remarkable, but it's also ground-bounded in both financial and political terms. It runs on four constraints. Four constraints that mean civil society alone cannot do the structural work, not because civil society fought in, because it was never built for that job. So number one, funding. The fact-checking tier is paid in substantial part by the very foreign platforms whose distribution it depends on. And the irony is exactly the point. The fact-checking tier is paid by the foreign platforms through a third-party fact-checking program. That platform profits from the very engagement that disinformation drives, while funding the defense against it. So that's the first constraint. Two, scope. That funding is politically bounded. Monthly quota on how many items can be fact-checked. Political claims carved out during election periods, which is, of course, precisely when information pressure peaks. When the pressure is highest, the system goes quietly by design. So that's the second constraint. Number three, priorities. Research NGOs depends on international and corporate grants, which means the research program follows the grant map, not the threat map. If a topic is fundable, it is tracked. If a topic is fundable in this quarter, it is tracked this quarter. If a topic is strategically important but not fundable, it is not tracked. Politically sensitive, interagency, span jurisdictions, those topics generally fall off. Or they get tracked partially by someone on evening hours. So that's the third constraint. Four, mandate. This is the binding constraint. Civil society can test, civil society can expose, it can patch, but it can't really regulate platforms. It can't really compel transparency. It can't rewrite incentives. Those are rule-making functions. They require public authority. They are not on the menu for grant-funded NGO, no matter how good that NGO is. So every one of these four constraints is a feature of civil society, not really a bug. Civil society is supposed to be voluntary. Civil society is supposed to be plural. It's supposed to be accountable to its funders. That is what exactly makes it civil society. But it also means the structural work, such as the platform accountability, the transparency compulsion, the incentive rewriting, all has to come from somewhere else. Public accountable institutions, state capacity of non-repressive kind, the kind of machinery that can set rules, audit, the final one, audit compliance, and actually bind the incentive of cross-border platforms. This is what publicize means in this talk. Not nationalize, not censor, not merge civil society into the state, but take on at the public level the rule-making function that civil society is structurally unequipped. So last one. So to close, 4 key takeaways. Taiwan is the stress test. Taiwan has built the most mature civil society defense in the democratic world. But the defense was built for claims, not for systems. It runs on contracts, not on mandate, which leaves one open question, and I want to leave you with it rather than answer it. The defense works because it's democratic, voluntary, plural, civil society-led. But the structural work needs state capacity. How do you publicize that defense, bring into the state without losing what made democratic in the first place? I don't really have a clear answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kai-Shan. We're all struggling with this, and I know you interact with partners around the world. I mean, you talk to American civil society actors and researchers who are in this space. They have similar concerns and complaints to what you just raised. Yeah. Okay, Karis?
This sets up very nicely. My two co-panelists have spoken a lot about what I like to call Taiwan's democratic software, its public opinion, its norms, its values, its disinformation or counter-disinformation efforts. And I'm going to talk today about Taiwan's political institutions, what I like to call its democratic hardware. And bottom line up front, although Taiwan has a high Taiwan ranks highly on democratic indices. Its political institutions are under tremendous strain right now. And I'll get into the details in just a minute here. So first, I just want to highlight, for those in the room who don't know, there's various international organizations that rate the quality of democracies around the world. The perhaps most prominent one in the US, or the one that's the best known, is Freedom House. Taiwan scores very highly on Freedom House. Taiwan last year, they ranked it second in Asia behind Japan with a score of 94 out of 100, significantly higher than the United States, as well as many of the countries in Europe. There's another index. If you don't like the American index, you can go to Europe. There's something called the Bertelsmann Transformation Index. They rank countries that are outside of the OECD, and Taiwan's political transformation score is 9.6 out of 10, which puts it second in the world in this group. So the Europeans rank Taiwan very, very highly on its democratic index. If you don't like what continental Europe has done, well, you can go to the UK. The Economist Intelligence Unit has an annual democracy index. Taiwan's score in that last year was 8.78, which puts it 12th in the world. Pretty good for a country that was under martial law 40 years ago. And then VDEM, which is probably the broadest and most comprehensive index, is actually relatively pessimistic on Taiwan. It has it ranked in the top 20%, just between Japan and Brazil. And I know we've got a couple people who know Korea in the room. For some reason, VDEM really likes Korea. It ranks it higher than Taiwan. All of the others are very down on Korea. So there is some interesting variation across these. But the big takeaway is Taiwan looks pretty good when you look at these kind of high-level comparative democracy indices. And so when I teach a course on Taiwan politics here, I have a week on the Taiwan political miracle, and I always start with this set of data. Taiwan, from a country that was a police state under martial law, has now transformed into one of the world's highest quality, most resilient democracies. And yet, when we turn from those comparative indices and look specifically at what's happening in Taiwan today, what we see is a lot of this. So fighting in the legislature, which many people in the room have probably seen videos or at least pictures of the regular brawls that happen in Taiwan's legislature. But it's not just a feature of legislative politics in Taiwan. There are regular protests in the streets. There are debates over constitutional and institutional reform. There are protests against one party or the other. More recently, there's been, I think, a very worrisome kind of escalation of partisan infighting in Taiwan. So the Constitutional Court in Taiwan is now effectively paralyzed. It does not have a quorum in which it can actually issue decisions that are legally binding. The premier, the DPP premier, has refused to countersign legislation in an unprecedented kind of reaction to legislative actions against the executive branch. And then the legislature has in turn not tried to get rid of the premier. They've instead turned to mostly symbolic action to try to impeach the president. They don't have the votes to do it, but they're going to do this kind of symbolic gesture anyway. And so this does not look like a high-quality, well-functioning democracy when we dig down into the details. So what's going on here? Why is this kind of the standard picture of Taiwan for people who actually kind of know the day-to-day politics, rather than those kind of beautiful, high-ranking indices that Taiwan is on? The simple answer, I hope this isn't too simple, but Taiwan has divided government right now. The legislature is controlled by the opposition, the executive branch is controlled by a different party, and Taiwan's democratic institutions are just not designed to work well under divided government. So there's the executive branch, both the president and the premier who appoints the entire cabinet are controlled by the Democratic Progressive Party. The legislature is controlled by a coalition of the KMT and the TPP. Ever since the 2024 election, they have been at loggerheads. They have agreed on very little, and they are locked in a long-term power struggle that has then mapped onto the institutional difference here. This, I should note, is fairly unusual in Taiwan's democratic history. There's only one other period in the last 30 years where you had divided government, with the legislature controlled by one party and the executive branch controlled by a different one. And that was the Chen Shui-bian era from 2000 to 2008. This coincidentally was also the period that I first got really interested in Taiwan politics and first experienced living in Taiwan. And so the current situation actually feels very retro to me. It's kind of a throwback to the Chen Shui-bian era. And I think I've actually been doing a lot of thinking about the Chen Shui-bian era and the lessons, both good and bad, for the current period. And I think people who really care about Taiwan's democratic quality would do well to go back and actually, if I can put a plug in, read our book that Larry and I co-edited along with the late Zhu Yunhan on the Chen Shui-bian era. Because there are a lot of things that were, a lot of institutional reforms, a lot of institutional innovation that happened during the Chen era that are now affecting how politics plays out today in Taiwan. So let me just note more generally the problems of divided government in a presidential regime. As we know in the United States, when you've got Congress controlled by one party and the presidency controlled by another, there tends to be a lot of institutional warfare between those two branches. Same in Taiwan. So it sets up a partisan battle, in particular to control independent or supposedly impartial institutions that are separate from the legislature and the executive branch. The most important, the foremost among those, is the Constitutional Court in Taiwan. And so really from day one of this new situation, the Constitutional Court has been in the crosshairs of the opposition. It's also exposed some serious design flaws in some of these supposedly impartial institutions. As I'll get into in more detail in a moment, the National Communications Commission in Taiwan, which regulates broadcast communications, is actually paralyzed right now. It doesn't have a quorum to make decisions. And that's because the president has nominated candidates that the legislature doesn't like and won't confirm. Many of these new institutions that are struggling today were actually created or amended during the Chen Shui-bian era. And so maybe a few people in the room who actually know Taiwan had something called the National Assembly before 2005. The National Assembly was actually a body separate from the legislature that confirmed a lot of the appointees to these independent institutions. That was abolished in 2005 and its powers transferred mostly to the legislature. And so the impartial institutions that are struggling today are mostly a result of this reform and some related reforms from the mid-2000s. I'm going to talk briefly about three. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on the Constitutional Court and some of the design problems with that. I'll talk a little bit more about the NCC, and then I'll talk about prosecutors' offices in Taiwan. So first, Taiwan's Constitutional Court is important because it has the sole authority to issue constitutional interpretations, and it can invalidate legislation. And since the opposition has taken over control of the legislature, the court has not been shy about invalidating legislation that the KMT and TPP together have passed. It's done that several times. It is designed to have 15 members with staggered 8-year terms. New in the Chen Shui-bian era, these members are all now appointed by the president and confirmed by the legislature by a simple majority vote. The problem, as you can imagine, with 8-year terms is that in Taiwan, the president and the legislature are also on 4-year election cycles. And so by the end of the Ma Ying-jeou era in Taiwan, Ma Ying-jeou had been president for 8 years. The KMT had controlled the legislature for 8 years. And so as a result, every single justice was a Ma Ying-jeou appointee. Same problem during the Tsai Ing-wen era. By the end of Tsai's 8 years in office, every single justice had been appointed by Tsai Ing-wen and confirmed by a DPP majority legislature. And so as a consequence, the court looks like by the end of those 8 years, it's going to be pretty friendly to the ruling party's interests. Even if the justices themselves openly have no intention of ruling on partisan lines, they're chosen in such a way that it's the opposition has, I think, good reason to be deeply suspicious of the court's impartiality. So there is a current standoff over the court. The terms of 7 justices expired in late 2024. Lai Ching-te, the president, nominated justices to replace them. The legislature now has twice voted down slates of nominees. So the court still only has 7 justices out of its quorum of 15. Making things worse, and this is, I think, an underappreciated point. In 2022, the DPP majority legislature actually changed the Constitutional Court procedure to require only a simple majority of the justices to rule on legislation in order to make it unconstitutional. So they lowered that threshold from 2/3 to 1/2. That meant that you can have a very divided court that still can issue a ruling that favors one party camp or the other. And in December 2024, the KMT and TPP then raised the threshold to invalidate laws to 9 of 15 justices. So with only 7 of 15 justices now, the court has no power to invalidate laws under this new amended Court Act. The court then turned around and said in December 2025, no, that law that amended the Court Procedure Act is itself unconstitutional. But even there, the court was split. 5 justices said yes, 3 justices dissented. They didn't follow the normal procedure to do that. And so the court now is operating in this kind of weird legal gray area where its decisions are not, that at least the legislative majority has no real meaning, no real incentive to comply with the court's decisions. And so the court, I would argue, is in a constitutional crisis right now. Second, Taiwan's NCC. This regulates broadcast media around Taiwan. It's one of several independent institutions, independent commissions that during the Chen Shui-bian era were created, modeled on the US system. We're also a presidential regime here, and Taiwan took inspiration from some of our independent agencies and thought that was a good model to inject into their system. Unfortunately, they brought some of the same political pathologies that our own system suffers from into the Taiwan system. In particular, there are members appointed by the president, confirmed by the legislature for 4-year terms. And so if you have divided government, like in the US, there is a partisan fight over who gets to be the majority group in that commission. And so Lai has struggled to get his own nominees confirmed to the National Communications Commission. 4 of those commissioners' terms expired almost 2 years ago now. The National Communications Commission needs a quorum of at least 4 members, and so it too is effectively paralyzed right now. And this is in part important because the NCC has the power to issue broadcast licenses, and it actually, during the Tsai Ing-wen era, refused to renew the license of a pan-blue television station and actually took it off the air. So the legislature, now controlled by the pan-blue opposition, has decided that the NCC needs to be fundamentally changed or maybe even just cease to function. The third of many of these institutions that are challenging right now is prosecutors' offices. So Taiwan has district prosecutors. Each jurisdiction has a chief prosecutor, and all of these prosecutors then ultimately report to the Minister of Justice, who is in turn appointed by the premier, who's subject to the president. There is also a prosecutor general who is appointed directly by the president and confirmed by the legislature. He is also on a 4-year term. And so the current nominee is stuck in the legislature. President Lai, in picking Mr. Xu here, Xu Xiang, did something rather remarkable. He picked someone who's actually attracted opposition from across the political spectrum, not just from the opposition. And so he's managed, in a rare bout of kind of tripartisanship, to get broad opposition to this candidate. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that he's probably not going to get confirmed, and the Prosecutor General's office is then going to end up vacant very soon. Also, there's been a long-standing complaint that justices and prosecutors train together and follow similar career paths in Taiwan. There was a kind of half-hearted effort under the DPP administration to try to change this. They never followed through. And so now there is still a lot of concern that prosecutors in Taiwan are politicized. One of the major complaints of the opposition is that once Lai Ching-te became president, the prosecutors in Taiwan started to prosecute all of Lai Ching-te's political opponents, or that's the claim. Just for the record, I'll say I don't think the prosecution of the former mayor Ko Wen-je, who's also the head of the TPP, is political persecution, but it's an easy claim to make given this institutional structure in Taiwan. There's broad suspicion that prosecutors operate at the behest of the ruling party or the president himself. Lest I sound too negative here, I think there are some underappreciated institutional strengths in Taiwan. One is the central bank. Since this has been in the news in the United States recently, I'll just note nobody in Taiwan talks about the independence of the central bank. It's a kind of dog that doesn't bark. The institutional structure here is interesting in that the president appoints the central bank chair with no legislative approval needed, and the central bank president has such broad stature and such respect that no president in the democratic era has dared to kind of pressure the central bank to change its monetary policy. And so it operates with broad authority, and it hasn't become a partisan issue. The Central Election Commission in Taiwan has broad respect. I missed an opportunity here that there's actually a new chair of the Central Election Commission who was confirmed last month. He's now in. So there are at least 4 of the 7 members now hold 4-year terms, and the Central Election Commission will continue to function for the next 4 years. So this is a relative success story. And then I'll just note, nobody talks about this either in Taiwan, but the National Police Agency is actually, police in Taiwan are the most trusted single institution of all of Taiwan's major political institutions. There's broad respect and trust for the police in Taiwan. And that's despite the fact that the former head of the police agency was actually the KMT nominee for president in 2024. Despite that, the police didn't become a sort of partisan or politicized institution in Taiwan. So just to sum up, I'll note, again, Taiwan's democracy gets high rankings from all the international organizations, but I think it has significant institutional design flaws. These problems become especially apparent during divided government. We haven't had divided government in Taiwan until 2024 for a long time. So for a while, these problems could be kind of papered over, or they were invisible. They now come to the fore when you've got the legislature and the executive branch controlled by different parties. And I think ultimately, if Taiwan is to continue as a liberal democracy, it will require resolving some of these institutional weaknesses. So the final observation I'll make is if there's an executive legislative impasse over nominations, you need a better reversion point than the institution just ceases to function. You need some kind of default, some kind of fallback. Either the members stay on longer or there's some kind of impartial body that steps in and appoints people. And you certainly need a constitutional court that is more independent of partisan politics. And one way to do that would be to extend the terms of constitutional court justices beyond an 8-year term. So I've teed up a lot. Thanks for listening and welcome your questions and comments.
Yeah, well, thank you. I saw Kai-Shan leave. I guess he had, oh, there he is. Okay, so can the three of you come up now? I'll just offer a couple of reactions, mainly to the last presentation. One is, Gi-wook, it sounds like a kind of right moment for another comparative study of Korean and Taiwan democracy, because after all, this kind of standoff between the legislature and the president produced a pretty traumatic crisis in Korea and is producing pretty serious dysfunction now. And of course, this is why our dear late colleague, Chu Yun-han, for 25 years, advocated for Taiwan to move to a parliamentary system constitutionally, and why the argument in comparative politics for parliamentary over presidential systems, I think, continues to have, frankly, a lot of persuasive elements. I will say, Karis, that even if there was not divided government, either because the two branches were aligned electorally or because there was a parliamentary system, you would still face the problem, which we have in the United States as well, of partisan appointments of what should be independent institutions. And frankly, there are easy and obvious solutions to this, which would be to have at least some element of nonpartisan or bipartisan means of choosing these people. I don't think it's really a healthy arrangement. But in any case, we don't have a lot of time, so I'll see if we have any audience questions that we can take for a few minutes. And if not, I will pose. Of course, Gi-wook, go ahead.
It's like tariffs. So how to fix those institutional problems?
Yeah. Which ones? All of them?
Well, the core one that you were exposing.
Yeah.
I fully understand the problem.
Yeah.
But the main challenge is how to fix.
Right. Well, I think Larry's.
In Korea, I think President Trump could do by particular martial law then.
Yeah. I think that's a bad solution, declaring martial law. So the independent commission model that comes out of the U.S., I think Larry's already pointed in the right direction, which is to have somebody besides the president and the legislature responsible for either choosing or confirming the members of that. I mean, one way to do this would be to have the body itself choose their successors. Another would be to have a requirement that all of the political parties nominate candidates. And so you would have, in fact, there's a model for this in Taiwan in the makeup of the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy Board, where all of the political parties nominate a certain number of members of that board. And so rather than trying to take the institution out of partisan politics, you actually have it reflect partisan politics. You build on that, but you prevent any one party from controlling a majority of the institution. So they have to talk to each other. On the Constitutional Court, I think that's probably the most important and the most obvious problem. There's actually a simple change that could be made, which is to go back to the 2/3 majority requirement to invalidate legislation. One of the nice things about that requirement was there was always a fair amount of ideological diversity on the court, and if you had to have 2/3 vote yes, they had to talk to each other, and they issued narrower rulings then because they could build a broader consensus only if the rulings were narrow. With a 5-3 split, for instance, in the current court, those 5 justices may be way out of line from the median. So I think there's lots of ways in which innovative thinking here could matter. Yeah.
I want to come back to our other 2 panelists, who happen to be the 2 that are actually from Taiwan. So you can weigh in on this theme if you wish, but I want to come back to the 2 ends of public opinion formation, the flow that comes from now heavy influence on public opinion, which is what's happening online and social media, and then the downstream effect in public opinion. And I'll start, Kai-Shan, by asking you, I want to focus for a moment on the content of disinformation, and we know where it's coming from. Have you detected any systemic and continuing effort on the part of the PRC, and not like in the weeks before an election, but in a more subtle and sustained way to try to pollute the idea and value of democracy, and to promote the PRC, sympathy toward the PRC and its system, to kind of change attitudes and values? And Kaiping, Wave 7 is underway. You don't have the data yet, but there is a trend in the world. You're familiar with this because you're not only looking at the Asian Barometer, you're following other surveys, including the World Values Survey, of kind of youth disillusionment with democracy. And so we've seen a trend in Taiwan of, in a way, generational replacement, younger generations believing in democracy, replacing older generations that were, socialized in the authoritarian era. But I've begun to wonder whether there might be a curvilinear pattern here now, and whether some of the most passionate pro-democracy groups might be the somewhat older generations that were socialized during the struggle for democracy and the initial euphoria of democratization in the late 1990s. So we can start with you, Kaiping, on the trend side, and maybe what worries you as well as what gives you hope in terms of resilience, and then come to Kai-Shan.
Okay. Actually, I didn't really look into the data, but I think my colleague, Professor Yu Zhongzhang, he actually found out that young people in Taiwan, their support for democracy is a little bit lower than the generation before them. And the strong supporter of democracy is actually the generation who experienced democratization in Taiwan.
So affirming the hypothesis I
Yes.
articulated.
So which means like socialization is really important. But for younger generation, because when they grew up, Taiwan was already a democratic country. So what they are concerned with, it's just like other youth in every country. They are concerned with their jobs, housing problems, and all that. And currently, they don't see the system is working for the young people, for the young generation. But I don't think that even though the support level probably is a little bit lower than the older generation, but I think most of them still reject authoritarian alternatives. Yeah, so it's just like they might question the governance issues in Taiwan, just like what Karen say, it's just old problems. And so they might, dampen their confidence a little bit. But ask them to choose between democracy and authoritarian regime, definitely democracy.
So there's nothing alarming there. And now, Kai-Shan, so what have you been seeing more broadly in terms of the arc of longer term, if I can put it this crudely, because I'd like to, PRC propaganda and pushing of certain longer term narratives, not short term disinformation? And you mentioned these civic education efforts as part of, so can those kind of broaden, or are they broadening beyond like countering disinformation to kind of why people should care about democracy? Go ahead.
Yeah, but that would involve a rather substantive issue, But I think I want to sort of answer your question, but from a different angle, because currently, of course, when we talk about disinformation or theme in Taiwan, we are dealing with PRC intervention. That's a very obvious target. So, but the problem is we have two frameworks to choose from. The first one is the mis and the disinformation framework. Is rather content focused. But the challenge is we have to make a really clear distinction between this and the misinformation if we want to apply this framework to regulate the particular speech, right? For example, the pro-PRC speech. Then to be qualified as disinformation, this piece of information has to be malicious, it has to be false, it has to be harmful. But the problem is, if this is a particular kind of speech that proposes PRC value, it falls into the category of political speech. And within the Taiwanese legal framework, political speech enjoys the highest protection of the freedom of speech. Then the government won't be able to intervene. So that's the dilemma. Otherwise, that kind of piece of information will become misinformation, and there is no regulation needed. So that's the challenge we are facing.
It is a challenge.
Exactly. So that's the first framework. The second framework is foreign information manipulation and then interference. And in this framework, the focus is not the piece of information, it turns to the behavior. So you have to identify the killing chain, then you have the opportunity to identify who this tech actor is. But the problem is, in practice, it's almost impossible to track that actor. Yeah.
Okay, I'll conclude with this question because we then need to transition to the distinguished keynote speech. We have two electoral kind of stress tests coming up. Mm-hmm. One will be this November in the city and county elections. And the second, of course, will be in January of 2028 in the next presidential election. So maybe I can just go down in order in the panel to conclude and have you reflect on any concerns you have or expectations you have or what we might look for in terms of, not necessarily who's going to win, who's going to lose, but, what these might tell us about the resilience of Taiwan's democracy. We'll start with you, Kai-Ping.
There are a lot of rumors.
Okay, feel free to share some
like,
of them.
if the DPP lose the elections, maybe there will be martial law before 2028. I don't know, and it looks like we have to watch the 2026 local election closely, and to look at how, because now the prediction is like the DPP is going to lose, but how much we don't know. And
That is that the DPP will lose ground?
yes, the DPP will lose ground, but I don't know, because it looks like the KMT is not winning back a lot of supporters either. So I don't know, but what I expect is that no matter who wins or who loses, they should take it as normal politics should do. They shouldn't treat it like, if the other side wins, then it's the end of the world. And so they mobilize their supporters to question the electoral results, and then and further, question the legitimacy of the regime.
Well, to someone living in the United States, this has a ring of familiarity in terms of concern. Kai-Shun?
I was just talk about this a little bit, because local election this year is going to be the first year where AI has its full force to escalate disinformation. So we are going to see new disinformation or filming cases, new case study, and new problems.
Okay, Karis, I know you've been looking at the electoral map for November of this year in Taiwan very closely. So what are your thoughts?
Well, so let me just make 3 points. One is, I think this is actually a sneaky hard election for the KMT to win. I think expectations for them are pretty high, and they're defending a lot of seats. So I think there's a lot of downside risk for the KMT in this election in 2026. Second, I just note, these are pretty different elections, 2026 and January 2028. Local elections in Taiwan play out a lot different than presidential elections. And so whoever wins in November 2026, I think, can take heart that they could potentially do a lot better, whoever loses in 2026 can take heart that they could do potentially a lot better in 2028. So I would caution against drawing inferences from the results this fall about what will happen in January 2028. I think both of those are still wide open races right now. And then third, I just note, since I was talking about democratic hardware, Taiwan's election management system is first class. It's really good. And
Wish we had such a good one.
Taiwan has gone through multiple rounds of heated electoral contests where there's charges and countercharges and accusations of vote buying and PRC interference. But the actual day of voting and counting is almost a sacred day in Taiwan. And the results are very accurate, they're very transparent, they're counted very quickly, and everybody's full view of everybody who wants to watch. So there's very little reason to dispute the actual numbers that come out of the polling station. And that is, I think, another underappreciated strength of Taiwan's democracy. And so whatever else happens, I'm confident that the results will be counted quickly, freely, and fairly.